The DJI Action 5 Pro, the Insta360 Go 3S, the Ace Pro 2, the X4 and the new GoPro Hero 13. I've tested them all when skiing and they all take good shots and are well suited for cool skiing or snowboarding recordings. Each also has its advantages and disadvantages and there is no such thing as the perfect camera. But for skiing or snowboarding in particular, I have a clear favorite and would recommend one camera in particular. I'll now show you shots from all 5 cameras and explain the advantages and disadvantages of each camera. At the very end, I'll tell you which camera I would personally choose. But as this may be different for you, take a close look at all the comparison shots. The GoPro Hero 13 had to take a lot of criticism. It was not received very positively, also because it's hardly a further development of the Hero 12. Apart from a few accessories, it has hardly anything new to offer. This doesn't change the fact that the Hero 13 is excellent for skiing and takes cool shots despite all the criticism. And the big weakness of the Hero 13 compared to the other traditional action cameras is its low light performance. And in most cases, this doesn't play a role when skiing. Yes, it may be that a slightly weaker dynamic range can make a difference from time to time when skiing through a forest. But in most cases, the image quality of the Hero 13 is perfectly fine for skiing. Most of the time you will have very good lighting conditions and it hardly matters that the Hero 13 has a smaller sensor than the DJI Action 5 Pro or the Ace Pro 2 for example. So what are its particular strengths and weaknesses? For me, one of the advantages of the GoPro Hero 13 compared to the other cameras in this comparison are the slow motion recordings. The GoPro Hero 13 has a few clear advantages here. Unlike the other cameras, it can shoot in 4K and 120 frames per second in the very wide field of view Super View. Action View on the Ace Pro 2 or Ultra Wide on the Action 5 are not available in 4K 120, even if it has to be said that the image quality in 4K on the Hero 13 is somewhat poorer than in 5K. In addition, the Hero 13 can also capture slow motion footage in 2.7K at 240 frames per second, and with the new Burst Slow-Mo mode also enables extreme slow motion footage, albeit in a greatly reduced image quality. The GoPro Hero 13 is also the only camera in this comparison that captures GPS data internally. And that is an advantage because especially when skiing, it can be cool to show the speed or altitude. I also like the colors of the Hero 13 relatively well. These shots here were all taken with the color profile natural, which looks a bit dull, but it's a very neutral and natural color profile. While the GoPro Hero 13's field of view is perhaps the widest for slow motion shots, the GoPro has the narrowest field of view compared to the other cameras in the standard settings, for example in 5K 60. A lot of what I'm going to say today will of course depend on what kind of shots you want to take when skiing and what mount you use. Personally, for example, I'm not a fan of the helmet mount and usually use the action camera on a pole to film myself. But regardless of that, a particularly wide field of view is almost always an advantage when skiing or snowboarding. Of course, you can compensate for this disadvantage by getting the ultra-wide lens for the Hero 13. However, this is a relatively expensive accessory and also leads to limitations in terms of resolution and frame rate. Another disadvantage is that the standard packaging does not include a magnetic mount. Especially when skiing in the cold, it's an advantage if you can quickly and easily remove the camera from a mount and put it in your pocket, for example, if only to protect it from the cold. I also consider the operation of the display to be a disadvantage of the Hero 13. Compared to the competition, the display of the GoPro Hero 13 is still the least responsive display to operate, which is of course an even greater disadvantage in the cold. Alongside the X4, the Insta360 Go 3S is the most unusual camera in this comparison. The extremely small form factor naturally makes it very versatile. I said earlier that I'm not a big fan of the helmet mount myself, but especially if you want to mount your camera on a helmet, weight and size play a decisive role. And this is where the Go 3S simply has a big advantage. Not only is it the lightest camera to carry on a mount or selfie stick, it's also the least noticeable camera. If you have mounted on a helmet or other unusual place, you can also check the framing using the Action Pod for example, and don't necessarily have to connect it to your smartphone. And if you want, you can also use it directly in the Action Pod on a pole and use the flip-up display to get the framing right when you're filming yourself skiing. The Go 3S can also shoot in 4K, albeit only at a frame rate of 30 frames per second. Personally, I think that the image quality in good lighting conditions, which you will normally have when skiing, is comparable to the image quality of other action cameras. Despite the much smaller form factor, you can hardly recognize any relevant difference. But of course, the reduced frame rate options are an important disadvantage. For example, if you want to shoot at 60 frames per second, you have to reduce the resolution to 2.7K. The Go 3S is therefore not suitable for recording at high frame rates and therefore also not suitable for slow motion recordings. But if you can do without this and are fine with 30 frames per second, the Go 3S could be an interesting alternative to the other bigger cameras. You can of course find a detailed comparison between the Go 3S and other action cameras, in which I explain all the pros and cons in detail on my channel. The Insta360 Ace Pro 2 also has a number of advantages and a few disadvantages when skiing. As you may have noticed in the tests of the last few weeks and months, the Ace Pro 2 offers excellent image quality, beautiful colors and an outstanding dynamic range. Of course, all of this also plays an important role when taking shots when skiing. It is also the only camera in this comparison that can take extremely high resolution skiing shots in 8K at up to 30 frames per second. However, there are other features that set it more strongly apart from the competition for this purpose. The Ace Pro 2 has a very wide field of view, which in the standard settings is clearly wider than that of the Hero 13 and also slightly wider than that of the Action 5. This is also an advantage when skiing, regardless of whether you're using the camera on a pole, chest mount or helmet. And especially if you want to film yourself skiing or snowboarding, the flip-up display is a decisive advantage. With the large and high quality flip-up display of the Ace Pro 2, you can simply assess the framing much better than with the front displays of the other action cameras. And the Ace Pro 2 has another advantage that is very important when skiing. Thanks to the new wind guard, it's the best of all these cameras at reducing the very strong wind noise when skiing. The Ace Pro 2 also has a few disadvantages, as already mentioned. And the biggest disadvantage compared to the other traditional action cameras is certainly its size and weight. It's slightly larger and heavier than the Hero 13 and also than the Action 5, especially if you use the Action 5 without a frame. Whether this is a relevant disadvantage certainly depends on which mount you want to use when skiing. For example, if you wear the camera on a chest mount, it doesn't matter. However, if you wear it on a helmet, the additional weight will be noticeable. It is also noticeable on a pole, but in this case, I don't think it plays such a decisive role. Of course, these are not all the differences that distinguish the Ace Pro 2 in particular from the Action 5 and the Hero 13. For detailed comparisons, you should definitely watch the corresponding videos on my channel. Of all the traditional action cameras, the Action 5 has, in my opinion, received the most hype in recent months. It offers great image quality, has an extremely long battery life, produces very small files and doesn't have a very large body, at least if you use it without the frame. These are all advantages that also play an important role when skiing. I also like the high contrast cinematic look of the Action 5 and the ability to shoot in D-Log with 10-bit, even if I don't think this feature is absolutely essential for skiing. The Action 5 is simply a very good camera. There is hardly any doubt about that. And despite all the hype, I do see a few relevant disadvantages of the Action 5 in this comparison. And if I mention them now, DJI will probably never take me off their blacklist. In return, this is also one of the few channels where you can get an unvarnished opinion on the Action 5 Pro. Because what bothers me about the Action 5, and unfortunately I notice this again and again when skiing, are the terrible lens flares. These are always particularly noticeable when you have the sun in the frame, which can of course often be the case in winter. As I said, the Action 5 creates a very high contrast and cinematic look, but this sometimes doesn't look very natural. If you take shots in the shade, the high contrast means that the shot is too dark. And in direct comparison with the shots from the other cameras, it's noticeable that the bluish look of the Action 5 Pro, which is naturally supposed to be very cinematic, means that the white balance is not always quite correct. The white snow does not look completely white, but rather slightly bluish. In my opinion, the other cameras, including the GoPro, manage this better. Whether this bothers you is of course also a matter of taste, and both are also points of criticism that you might not have noticed immediately, because the Action 5 is of course an excellent action camera that is perfect for skiing. As a 360 camera, the Insta360 X4 naturally represents something very special in this comparison. And in my opinion, the advantages of a 360 camera also play a decisive role when taking shots when skiing. With 360 shots, you can freely select the framing in post. The X4 has by far the widest field of view in this comparison, it has the best image stabilization, and of course, there is the invisible selfie stick effect. All of these special strengths combined mean that you can use the X4 to take skiing shots that would not be possible with the other action cameras in this form. And the many mounts from Insta360 in combination with the invisible selfie stick effect allow you to take shots, especially of yourself, that are very different from the recordings of other action cameras and also open up a completely new dimension of filming when skiing. You can get an overview of the most important mounts for the X4 in my video on the best X4 mounts and accessories. As a 360 camera, the X4 naturally also has disadvantages, especially compared to the Action 5 and the Ace Pro 2, as it has significantly smaller image sensors compared to these two cameras. But this mainly has disadvantages in low-light conditions, which, as already mentioned, is rarely the case when skiing. Nevertheless, I can still see a few other disadvantages of the X4 compared to the other cameras when taking skiing shots. Two disadvantages in particular. The first is that the Insta360 X4 is only capable of taking slow motion shots to a limited extent. It's possible to shoot at 100 frames per second, but this is only possible in a very reduced resolution. Even for 60 frames per second, you have to reduce the resolution to 5.7K, and as you still have to reframe the recordings, the result of your recording is then a shot in 1080. If on the other hand you can live with 30 frames per second, the X4 takes recordings that differ only slightly from the other action cameras in terms of image quality. Incidentally, I recently produced an updated review of the X4 in which I outlined all the advantages and disadvantages of this camera in detail. The second disadvantage of the X4 is its size. It's slightly larger and also slightly heavier than the other cameras in this comparison. On a pole, this doesn't make such a big difference due to the elongated form factor, but if you want to wear it on a helmet, it does make a relevant difference. Well, which of these cameras would I personally use for skiing? For me, the answer is quite clear. Of all the action cameras, I would definitely choose the Insta360 X4 for skiing or snowboarding. The 360 shots in combination with the invisible selfie stick effect simply enable creative and immersive shots that would not be possible with a standard action camera in this form, especially if you mainly want to film yourself and don't want to capture other people skiing. I think you can really see the difference in these shots. The footage from the X4 is simply much cooler and more special than the footage from other action cameras. On the other hand, if you don't want to reframe 360 shots and are looking for a camera that you can easily attach anywhere, get the GoPro ES. Or if image quality is particularly important to you and you often want to take shots in poor lighting conditions when you're not skiing, then go for the Ace Pro 2 or the Action 5 Pro. As I said, all cameras take good shots when skiing, including the GoPro Hero 13 of course. You can find links to all 5 cameras in the video description. There are very special offers for all cameras this week. And if you use the links in the description for the X4 and the GoPro ES, you will also receive a very high quality gift. I'll put a list of additional reviews for all the cameras mentioned in the video description if you want to find out more. Give me a like as feedback if this video was interesting for you. There will be more videos on the latest action cameras, so stay tuned and see you next time.